Charles doing okay? Always a job.
Yeah, it's one day at a time.
Oh, what time is it? Are we starting on time?
Yes.
All right. Thank you so much.
All right.
Yeah, totally. All right, great. Okay, Shkoyach. All right. Morning, everybody. Morning. Yeah, every time we get masked, that's a big thing. Okay, awesome. Friends, countrymen. All right, here we go. Are we're online here? Hi, Caroline. Good morning. Shabbos.
Morning to
Shabbos.
you.
Oh, yes. Shabbos to online viewers. Okay, we have to come up with a name for the online, you know. Look how high tech this stuff. I know. Roma you, Roma me, Roma everybody. So here we go. So Chaver there, and growing Chaver. We're going to start with Brachot Torah, and there it is. You ready? Baruch atah Adonai Asher Kiddushanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivonu Asor k'divrei Yisrael. All right. Here we go. Learning. Okay. I gave a class this week at the Hyman Brown Center at the Senior Center and at the 92nd Street Y, and we explored some of the texts that I quoted last night in my sermon. I wanted to touch those today, but also add to it because I also was talking to some friends of mine from I had a couple of friends of mine from, and we were discussing. I don't know. One of my friends from high school kids go to like a very ultra-Orthodox yeshiva in Baltimore, and we were talking about the phenomena of kids like me who grew up in a very modern Orthodox milieu, and then wound up becoming very, very Orthodox. And that there's a phrase for that called flipping out. And we were talking about this phenomenon of flipping out, and I don't know, somehow it kind of became a very long and very tortured conversation about what's attractive about that world and what's not, and what's problematic about that world to us from our perspective, obviously. And from my perspective, I have a lot of insight and because I flipped out, and also some of the beauty and some of the problems and Toch Kidei, as we were doing this, a friend of mine said, "Hey, did you ever see this letter that was sent out by the head of this yeshiva that blah 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 son is going to go to?" And I said, "What letter?" He said, "A letter that he wrote in the aftermath of October 7th to his community, and it wasn't in his community; it was published." And it was. I said no, and so he sent it to me, and I read it, and my jaw dropped. It was such an offensive letter that it was so shocking to me that someone could write what he wrote. But of course, what he wrote, which you haven't seen yet, but I'll show you, is of a piece when we speak about the ways that people respond to tragedy or to suffering in various forms, small, medium, and large, grande, venti suffering, and it's of a piece with what some of the traditional responses are to this morning's Torah reading, the story of Nadav and Avihu, and it falls into the category of what's known in the word is theodicy. It's a construction that is conjoined two words, God and justice, really justifying God. It's theodike, theodicy, and it's usually, it's often offensive. It dehumanizes in an attempt to justify. It often denigrates. And so I just wanted to show you a couple of these pieces, but then also show you some of the pieces that I alluded to last night that are a different response to suffering. And then, hopefully we'll end on an appropriately upbeat note. We'll see. Okay, so let's start. This quote taken from a commentary on the book of Job, on the book of Eov, source number one. Those are familiar with the book of Job. It's essentially the Bible's, treatise on an approach to suffering. The Bible creates, in the tradition, Moshe wrote this, but scholars obviously debate that very strongly and see it as a work being formed at a particular point in time in order to discuss a burgeoning sense of this problem of God's providence and justice, and how those two things, God's goodness and God's providence, and how those two things can be reconciled. So in the book, Satan is critical of Eov, of Job, and this particular author, this is what his commentary on that is. He writes, moreover, Satan's criticism of Eov, Job, sheds light onto a fundamental truth. If the world functioned in a manner where every righteous individual, every tzaddik, is rewarded immediately and visibly, and where every rasha or wicked individual was punished in an equally transparent fashion, righteousness would be inauthentic. In such a world, one's serving of God would stem from promise of reward. Proper righteousness emerges from genuine awe and devotion towards our Creator. Started there because even that, which, by the way, good morning, everybody. It's like nice. It's 9 o'clock in the morning. We were about to talk about or the heavy stuff, and you might not be. You might be like, have I had my coffee yet? And now we're like, in these dense philosophical conversations. But okay, some of you are morning people, I hope. So, this too, as an opening, volley, is is often what's known as the argument from free will. That in order to create a maximal, universe of free will where people are free agents, one has to constantly be balancing, right? So that balancing the conditions so that free will is maintained. Is somebody really free as an agent if everything is so obvious to them, right? Is kind of the basic argument here, and that God, in an attempt for our own good, God will balance the universe. That when things seem too obviously providential and too obviously good, and then God will make sure that a sufficient amount of evil will be put into the system so that it remains this, right, an arena of where maximal freedom of choice is given. And God forbid it should be too obvious for us that doing good is the right thing to do. That would create the inappropriate conditions, and therefore reward would just be absurd. So I wanted to start with this because it showcases an intuitive sense that this is not a good argument. I just wanted to start there because it's any one of us at this moment, even as we read it, and there have been geniuses who have put this forward, Hicks, big theologians, philosophers. I want to start here because there is the prevailing philosophy at one point was that evil must exist, right, well, it's certainly the case that evil has to exist for good to exist. Those things co-arise. It wouldn't make sense. The categories co-arise, right? You wouldn't know light from this and the dark. But the way that this becomes almost offensive to us to hear this, that there must be this balancing, and that one must believe at this moment that in order for us, for our own good, to be able to be rewarded, we have to actually choose in an arena where maximal ambiguity is prevalent, so that our choice makes that much more moral. It's more morally audacious and more morally worthy of reward, right? It's more morally complicated. Um, I wanted to put that out there just to start, because be on the lookout for this kind of, you might be on the lookout for this kind of argument. Um, okay, let's just hold that there. Okay, now let's look at the text from this morning's Torah reading. Okay. Vayitchu b'nei Aaron and Nadav v'Avihu ish machtato vayitnu b'hen esh vayisim alei ktoretz vayakrivu lifnei Adonai esh zara asher lo tziva otam. Aaron's son Nadav and Avihu each brought their fire pan and put a fire in it, and then they put incense on it, and they offered before God an alien fire, a strange fire. The word is esh zara. Zara means to be alien or other or foreign. And then it says asher lo tziva otam, that wasn't commanded of them. It's not clear if the reason why it's zar is because it was not commanded of them. It could be just that the fire, as was pointed out in this week's Torah learning by Asher Chaim, that the fire was taken from the wrong place. Right? Like they brought the fire from the wrong fire. And that's what zar means. It's inappropriate, or it's not regulated fire, the wrong fire. In any event, it seems that the verse wants us to know they did something wrong. Right? It's not a good thing. It wasn't commanded. To not be commanded to do something, in this case, is a problem. And the fire comes from God in verse 2. And vatochalotam, and consume them, vayamutu lifnei Adonai, and they died. The fact that they died before God is is superfluous, right? We don't need to know that they died before God. That vayamutu. She said they died lifnei Adonai, in front of God. This was what led Josephus and very early commentators to say that it's not quite what it seems. Their death was really a kiss, and it was a divine, right, consummation, and that they died, but even though they died in an embrace with the divine. And this Eish Zara is ecstasy, and they were running in to give God a kiss, right? And they knew they were going in, and that this was going to happen, but for them it was a consummation to be longed for. What's the phrase from devoutly to be to be wished? That's what Lifnei Adonai does. Vayomer Moshe, and Moshe says in verse 3, Moshe says to Aaron, Vayomer Moshe el Aaron, he says directly to his older brother, Hu asher diber Adonai lemor, this is what God has said. We don't know where God said this, but this is what God has said somewhere. B'krovai kadesh v'al pnei kol ha'am ekaved, through my intimate ones or through those who are near to me. The word krovai means near, but also is a play, of course, on the word korban, which means to bring near. In this case, both are true. The ones who are near also have been sacrificed. To the ones who are near to me, I will be sanctified, ekadesh. V'al pnei kol am ekaved, and then my glory before all the people will be made, I guess, right? I'll have more glory in front of in the face of all the people. I'll be honored. And then Vayidom Aaron, and Aaron was silent. Okay. So we talked about this last night a little bit, like what was Aaron's silence and what's going on here. What's very interesting though is that the first thing that happens is not that Aaron was silent, but that his silence seems to be situated in response to Moshe's speech, which is very ironic, because as we know that Aaron was the one who was the speaker and Moshe was the one who had the speech impediment. And so there's something, you might even say this morning that maybe it's still the case. It's not just, on one level it could be that it was inverted. Moshe is speaking, right, free flowing, and Aaron's silent. So that inverts it. You could also say that actually it hasn't been inverted, it's still the same. Moshe still has a speech impediment. And that this is his speech impediment expressed itself here in saying the wrong thing. God forbid. I know that's a heretical thing to say. Maybe he says the wrong thing, and Aaron still knows what to say. And because he knows what to say, he also knows not what not to say. And Aaron's silence here is still his eloquence, because he knows that words fail at this moment, and because he knows words, he knows what not to say as well. Interestingly enough, you could say that this is the first moment of kind of theodicy and its response. One could say. One could say that theodicy as any doctrine that seeks to justify God's behavior and show God in the best light possible, or God still as a moral and benevolent, actor. And he seeks here, he doesn't necessarily blame the boys, right? The text seems to blame the boys, meaning saying that they brought a fire that wasn't commanded seems to essentially lay the blame at their feet. But Moshe seems, you could say that Moshe is trying to comfort Aaron by pointing in the direction of either this is what God has said, meaning it was predestined, or it was foretold. There's a reason for it. He's in a better place. Like any of these kind of, any of these things, they're in a better place. And Aaron's response can also be seen as a response to offensive theodicies. Like he could be saying, listen, really? It could also be that he's saying there might be time for that, but now's not the time for it, right? There's also the piece here of not that Moshe said the wrong thing, but maybe he said it at the wrong time, which is also possible. We all know that when you show up at a shiva, when somebody, even if you know that somebody, let's say somebody was smoking and they die of lung cancer, God forbid, right? And it's 100% clear to everybody that there's a causal connection. You don't show up at the shiva and say, listen, it's so sad, but really, can you blame? I mean, you reap what you sow. But we all know that there are times to state that you can say the wrong thing at the wrong time, the wrong thing at the right time, and the right thing at the wrong time, and this could be the right thing at the wrong time. But it's interesting that it's recorded that Aaron is silent. Like, by the way, there are other times where the silence of a character is just conveyed by not saying what nothing happens. Not every silence in the Torah is marked. X said something and then the other one was silent. Like, the Torah wants us to know that Aaron was silent. Otherwise, it wouldn't have written it. We could have just had Moshe saying something and then we don't know. We're like, what did Aaron say? We're like, I don't know, that's a midrash. Someone should write that later. But the Torah already tells us that Aaron is silent. And that's quite significant because it's a recorded silence, which means that it's something that the Torah wants us to know. Now, if we skip through the next, next like 13 verses or so, and we wind up in verse 16 in the book of Leviticus, we essentially have, in the aftermath of Aaron's of the two sons dying, Moshe immediately gets to business, right? Moshe immediately gets to business in taking the bodies out, figuring out they have to remove the bodies from the Holy of Holies. They have to send in, two characters to go to take the body out, and then Moshe gets back to the business of what was actually happening before it was interrupted by this tragic event, which was the consecration of the tabernacle, and there were sacrifices, and the sacrifices, some of them had to be enjoyed or eaten by the priest. That's part of the way that works. That's actually how they bring about forgiveness and so on. So it gets into the details of that. So it's like tragedy, and then logistics, funeral preparation, everything. But it gets back to what was happening that was so vital for the nation. Millions of people are depending upon this functioning tabernacle. And Moshe starts to talk to them about asking them and telling them and giving the directions to the ones who are remaining, the remaining two sons, and Aaron has two sons, Eleazar and Itamar. And then he starts to ask about the sin offering. You see verse 16 on the bottom of the page, right? And that's perfect. That little double page there is perfect. Thank you, Caroline. Ve'etzir chata darosh darash Moshe, and as for the sin offering, the sin goat, the hairy goat that was the sin goat, Moshe inquired, and this, by the way, we pointed out on Wednesday night. These two words that are exactly identical, even though the vowels make them into different words, they're the same exact letters. The consonants are the same. Darosh darash, which is right in the middle of the Hebrew, where it says inquired. You see that English word inquired? That English word is not, it's something, a lot is lost in translation there. Darosh darash, and I like Everett Fox translates this as inquired. Yes, inquired, because the doubling of the word gives it urgency. And it's also the midway point in the Torah in terms of words. According to the tradition, this is exactly the midway point in between the two darashes, which is also worthy of drash itself. The word to lidrosh deserves some midrash, right? Why would the middle point of the Mosaic Torah be the words to make inquiry? It's very deep. It's beautiful, right? The method and the means and the delivery system here. So he inquires. It's also about a sin, and the sin offering here. Who's the sin offering for? Is it for God? Is it for the community? But it was wholly burnt. V'hinei soraf. Vayitzov al Elazar leitamar bnei Aaron haTorah. Now Moshe gets angry at his nephews, the remaining children. That phrase notarim is very poignant. The remaining ones, the extra ones, notar. He's angry at them because there's nothing left over except them. Nothing from the sin offering is left over, and there had to be left over sin offering to be eaten. Why didn't you eat, in verse 17, did you eat that sin offering in the holy place? Yeah, there's so much in here, man, I'm telling you. We got to keep going though. Ki kodesh kadoshim hi. It's holy of holies. It was given to you in order to carry the iniquity, the sins of the congregation, in order to grant forgiveness in front of God. That's your job. You had to eat it. Right? Hain, verse 18, Hain lahuvad damayla kodesh pnima. It's true that the blood was not brought into the inner sanctuary. It's true, right? Which means that under the circumstances, the blood wasn't brought in, but you still should have eaten it. In other words, you had no excuse. You had to eat it, as I have commanded. By Yedaber Aaron, and then the two boys, the nephews, don't say a word to their uncle, but someone else steps in. Who steps in? Aaron, to his older brother. Now Aaron, his younger brother, he hasn't spoken since directly in this way to Moshe since the tragedy. And his first words are a rhetorical device that really there's no other example quite like this in the Torah. Would that they had sacrificed, let's say, they had sacrificed the sin offering and the holy burnt offering today, on a day where something such as this has occurred to us, right? To me, rather. Right? Vatikrena oti cha'ele, it has happened to me in this way. Ve'achalti chatat hayom, and I would have eaten this sin offering. In other words, I would have done everything you expected me to do. Hayitav b'nei Adonai, would that have made God happy? Would have been good in God's eyes? Can you feel the force of that question? Like he could have defended them. He could have said, okay, or he could have agreed with the critique. Okay, you're angry at them. And he says, would God, in other words, he doesn't ask Moshe, like, about law. He says, in God's eyes, would it have been told good? Is that really what good is? Really? And the power of that protest, that resistance, that question, right? It's a strong question. First of all, it shows that they didn't, it shows that they, on purpose, that they didn't eat it. Like they refused to eat it. There was a refusal to do what was expected of them, like civil disobedience. Like, we're not doing it. It would be an offense to us to do it. But then he just asks it rhetorically, as if Moshe has to think about it for a second. And Moshe does. And then these four very short words finish this piece. Vayishma Moshe, and Moshe heard. Moshe, who had spoken, now can hear Aaron's speech, right? And he doesn't respond with silence because he's swayed. And then the Torah says, Vayitav be'enav. It doesn't say, it's exactly the same words used for God. He said, would it have been good in God's eyes? Tov be'enei, like in God's eyes, it would have been good. And then it says, Moshe heard. And then in Moshe's eyes, it was good. In other words, he took on, he was able to enter into the mind of God and said, oh, from God's perspective, yeah, I see. Yeah, you're right. I see. And the Torah does this so beautifully. And this, I think, becomes lodged as a kind of complaint, as a kind of first, like, response to theodicy. And I want to show you a very different, I want to show you another example of a kind of resistance to facile and horrible theodical moments. Wendy.
Given the fact that Aaron and his sons did not eat the chatat, the sin offering, would you say then that the sanctification was incomplete?
Would I say it was incomplete? It was certainly incomplete, but nonetheless, it was incomplete because, and that was okay, right? It was okay, meaning like.
And it was incomplete.
Yeah, it made sense that it was incomplete. And so in some sense, you have here in a book that is very much about the book, and by the law, you have something spontaneous happen, right? Nothing spontaneous is supposed to happen in the sanctuary. Right? No tigers are supposed to be let out into the Holy of Holies. It's not supposed to happen this way. And something happens here that it's shocking in God's response, but it's also shocking and important that it's brought. It's almost like into this tightly managed universe, right? And again, don't forget the tabernacle is a kind of mini universe. It's a microcosm. Into the universe as it's ordered. Into the first, 2 chapters of the book of Genesis, where God orders things like in a container store, and it's exactly like Marie Kondo wants it to be. Something erupts. Somebody disobeyed. And Adam and Chava, like Adam and Eve, they disobey. And from that moment, right, the world of eros and the world of messiness and the world of sin, all of that emerges into the world, right? Into this tightly controlled universe, right? And that raises more, like in this story and in the story of Adam and Eve, it's the problem is that it's Adam and Eve, right? They chose the wrong, right? And these two boys also chose wrong. But it's much more complicated than that, because God is implicated in both of these stories. God's own commanding voice, or a universe which doesn't allow for human error, for human ingenuity or participation. There's something inherent in the Mishkan that needs this moment, and I hate to say that. And there's something reciprocal in the way that the Torah is telling us Aaron said the right thing. Moshe probably didn't say the right thing. Moshe is appeased, and we need to know all of those things as for us to respond also to any of these ruptures in what the moral order looks like, if that makes sense. Okay, we have to look. I know we have conversation here, but I want to look at. We have more text that I want to see. I know we could easily stop here and talk for the next 45 minutes, but I just want to see some more, and then we'll talk. Okay, let's look at the Lubavitcher Rebbe, source number 8. Okay? See, source number 8. Dorenu zeh sheris ha'pleta me'ashoah, sheba nergu al kiddush Hashem 6 million Yehudim Hashem yikom damam. Our generation, the remnants of the refugees from the Holocaust, in which 6 million Jews were killed for the sanctification of God's name. Hashem will take revenge on their blood. Says this difficult thing that happens in our time, that this generation is being accused, this ember saved from the fire, firebrand saved from the conflagration. He says, this disgracing of the honor of the holy ones that were killed for this, in the Shoah, through a justification of the Shoah by stating that the measure of sins, right, is filled, i.e. those killed had sinned. Like in the aftermath of the Shoah, there were people who said there must have been something that they did that was wrong. There are matters which are totally unwanted, which do not come as punishments for sins, but rather because this was simply God's decree without any reason or explanation in any intellectual way or in the wisdom of Torah. No greater persona than the Lubavitcher Rebbe of blessed memory. He wrote that it's a chilul kvodam shel kedoshim. It is an absolute desecration of the honor of those who died. And when he says those who died, he didn't just say like, right, the Orthodox or the observant Jews who died. He didn't say like, it's this desecration of their name, but not the name of the communists or the atheists or the homosexuals or the, right? He didn't say that. He just said 6 million, all of them, right? Including, right, those who were intermarried, or like all of them, every single one. He didn't single out one who was the Reform movement that had strayed from the Torah. He refused to offer Aaron, like Yidom Aaron, and Aaron was silent. Those who come along with their pointing fingers, or they're trying to justify or trying to explain, he refused. Like Abram Joshua Heschel said, constantly wondering, like, theodike, where was God? We have to justify God. And the Shoah said, he says we have to have an androdike. Right? Where anthrodike? Where was the human being? Where was man? Where was humanity? Right? So the Lubavitcher Rebbe here is essentially saying something that's already found in the Gemara in Menachos, in source number 9. One of the most famous stories in the entire, like in all of Talmudic literature, is found in source number 9. In the Talmud, in the tractate called Menachot. Amar Rav Yehuda. Caroline, we're in source number 9. Amar Rav Yehuda Amar Rav. B'sha'a she'ala Moshe l'marom mitza'o la'kadosh baruch hu sheyoshev v'kosher tarim la'otiyot. You need to turn the page, Caroline, to the next source. Can you do that or no?
Wait, sorry, what?
If you could just please, the next source, number 9, just the very next one.
Many apologies. I only got a few hours of sleep last night.
No, don't worry. I'm going fast. I want to get to the conversation. So, Rav Yehuda said in the name of Rav, at the hour when Moses went up to heaven, presumably on Mount Sinai, Mitza'ola Kadosh Baruch Hu, he found the Holy One, Sheyoshev, that was sitting and tying little crowns to the letters of the Torah. Amar lefanav, Ribono shel olam, Master of the world, mi me'akev al yadcha, who is holding your hand back? Presumably means from giving the Torah without these additions. It could also mean who's stopping you. Right? Why didn't you? It could also be, why are you doing this? Amar lo adam echad yesh. There's a future person, sha'atid liot besov kama dorot, that will in the future come at the end of many generations. The Akiva ben Yosef Shmo, and his name is Akiva ben Yosef. Akiva ben Joseph, who was the Rabbi Akiva, the great Rabbi Akiva, the greatest Talmudic sage. She'atid lidrosh al kol kotes v'kotes, tili tilin, tilei tilin, or tilin tilin shel halachot. That will use each and every one of these orthographic embellishments, right? The little crowns, the little little zippies on the top of letters. Each one will become a code for him to learn law from, not just the letters, but even the little tops of the letters. Right? That's why these crowns are there for him in the future. So in this rabbinic story, this construction, this little folktale, Amar lefanav, and Moses says to God, Ribono Shalom, Master of the world, Har'euli. He says, can I see him? Like a time capsule? Amar lo, Chazor lacharecha. He says, look behind you. Literally means go behind you, but it means like go to the way behind. Could be in his mind, it could be, it's a phrase for something, a portal. Halach v'yashav, he went and he sat. V'sov shmona shurot. He went into the back of the study hall, into the classroom where Rabbi Kiva was teaching his students, and he sat in the back of all, like 8 rows back, right? He didn't know. Moshe had no idea what they were talking about, which is the rabbinic way of saying that it's clear that the Torah that we've created from Moses' Torah might not be that recognizable to Moses, right? Like the great story, like Moshe, like he said, I have kosher laws to give you, You have to have 2 separate sets of plates, Comes down from Mount Sinai. No, that's not the way it went, right? You have to make sure that you have, special Passover dishwashers and soap and so, no. Right? It's clear that there's an evolution in Torah from Moses' Torah to the rabbinic Torah. And their way of mentioning that here is by saying he had no idea what Rabbi Kiva was talking about. Tashash kocho, he became depressed. He said, wow, Romemu today doesn't look anything like Romemu that I started, right? Who's this next generation rabbi, who's made it all this and this? So he felt like, they lost Moshe's Torah. And Kevan she'egia ledavar echad amru lo talmidav Rabbi menayin lecha amar lahen halach leMoshe misinai nityashva dato chazar. So they said that when they came to a part in the learning where one of the students asked Rabbi Kiva, where do we know this from? And Rabbi Kiva quoted Moshe. Rabbi Kiva said, we know it's a level of Moshe. It's a law that comes all the way from Moshe's time. Then Moshe was like, okay, I still have my place. My name is on the building. My name is on halakha. Okay. Now, the story continues though, because that's one part of the story, and that has a lot to do with continuity and with connection between generations and evolution and so on. But this part is really the point. Moshe went back through the time machine and went back to God and said, Ribono Shel Olam, said, God, Master of the universe, Yesh lecha adam kazeh ve'ata nosein Torah yadi. He says, you have a person like this in your arsenal, and you're giving the Torah through me. Amar lo, God said to Shtok, be quiet. Kach Allah b'machshava lefanai. This is my mind. You don't have any grasp in my mind. This is my mind. These are my plans. So then the scene moves. Amar lefanav, Moshe says, Ribono Shel Olam, Har'eisani Toraso har'eni scharo. He says, you have shown me his Torah, but now let me see his reward. Amar lo, Chazor lacharecha. He said, now go back into the time machine. So he went back in the time machine. Ra'ah, and he saw Sheshtoklin Bisaro B'makulin. Moshe saw that they were weighing Rabbi Kiva's flesh in a butcher shop. Amar lefanav, Ribono Shel Olam, it's famous phrase, Zu Torah v'zu schara. This is Torah, and this is its reward. Amar le, God said to him, Shtok. Also he said, quiet. Kach Allah b'machshava lefanai. This is how, right? This is how it has arisen in my mind. Now, that last part of the story, these 2 moments where Moshe asks questions and God responds, in the rabbinic mind, God responds by saying, you have a good question, and I'm not going to give you an answer because your question, I can't answer your question, right? This is my mind, and that's what the Lubavitcher Rebbe was saying, right? The Lubavitcher Rebbe earlier was saying there are people who come along with the Holocaust and they have all kinds of, right, in the Inquisition, the Holocaust, the pogroms, and they have all kinds of theologies of suffering and theodicies, and they have the cause and effect. And the Lubavitcher Rebbe pulled the rug out from underneath them. Said Aaron was right. Aaron was right to be quiet. Be quiet. Like Vayidom Aaron, Aaron is quiet, and in the rabbinic story, God says to Moshe, "You should also be quiet." Like it's a good question, but like no, I can't give you an answer because this is my mind. Which doesn't mean to say that God said it's perfect or it's good. It doesn't mean to say that you should accept it and say, right, this is what God always, so this is the way of it. And I'm not even, like, I can't, there's no way in. It's a sealed question. Now, in later, I just want to say this for a moment, in one particular later thinker whom I didn't bring, takes this story and reads it slightly against the grain, meaning admitting that God is saying silence is the only response, but without saying, I will silence you, he sees God's silencing as instructive. Entering silence, you will know my mind. Right? Not be silent, as if the question itself is rebellion. Right? That's the way to read it. Like, shh. Who asked you? What do you like? I'm a fascist. Nobody asked. Nobody. You're not allowed to have any questions. I'm perfect. Rav Nachman of Breslov says that the word shtok here, which means silent, is actually an invitation to silence, and that only through silence, and then Aaron's silence becomes not a silence of acquiescence, but a silence of I'm entering into this mystery. As our dear friend Rabbi Elise Frischman said last night to me after the sermon, Rabbi Elise Frischman in our community who lost one of her own children in a tragic accident many years ago, I said after the sermon I gave over last night about silence as rebellion, she said essentially, she said to me, when you were talking about Aaron's silence, the word damama, damem, she said, I entered into the cave with Elijah the prophet who heard a cold damama daka, heard like a still small voice. The word damama here means silent, right? A speaking silence. That's the way that one great thinker called it, a silence that speaks, right? Now, this refusal, the refusal to give patent or facile answers, look at the next piece in source number 10, because if you grew up in the Orthodox world like I did, every year when you come to this liturgy, it's like, I mean, right, Yosla? I mean, it's like if you grow up in the world where in the Musaf, in the additional prayers in the holidays, you say these words, Mipnei chata'enu galinu me'artzenu. For our sins we were exiled from our land. Right? So you have to hear them say, Mipnei chata'enu galinu me'artzenu, right? V'nisrachachnu me'al admaseinu, v'enanachnu yicholim lalos. And he's like, you say these words in the liturgy that are essentially like, it's your fault. You blame the victim. You must have done something wrong. Rabbi Norman Lamb of blessed memory, was the president of Yeshiva University, a great modern Orthodox thinker, brilliant thinker, Sagittarius. He was an amazing philosopher. And he of course notes that in the prophets, right, it's not unique to the rabbis that they thought of our sins as the reason for us being punished. It's already in the Torah, right? The Torah is replete with Moshe exhorting the people saying, be good boys and girls, and then none of this bad stuff is going to happen to you. It's quid pro quo, reward punishments, all simple, right? Simple stuff. And then the prophets also have a similar idea. Like the reason why we didn't keep the Shemitah here. We didn't keep the Shemitah. Now the land will have its Shemitah. So listen to what Rabbi Lamb says. Just need a time check. What time is it? Like 9:30, 9:20. Okay. Half hour. Okay. Is there any validity to the Mignei Chata'enu, the Holocaust, as punishment explanation on which various responses are based? Of course there is. It's a theme found throughout the prophets and the Talmud. Yeah, you see that? And yet, I reject the cavalier invocation of this theme as a way of explaining the Holocaust. Indeed, in these special circumstances of such unprecedented butchery and unequaled suffering and unimaginable danger to our survival. Recourse to mipnei chata'enu, because of our sins, is massively irrelevant, impudent, and insensitive. Why so? First, there are many approaches to suffering, and sin is not the only one. Indeed, the whole brunt of the book of Job is to reject the simplistic recourse to mipnei chata'enu in any and all circumstances. Job was not guilty of any sin. That's the premise of the whole book, and yet he suffered. It was the friends of Job who insisted he must be guilty of some hidden sin, who were rebuked by God. God rebukes them in the book of Job. Hence, for us who live in comfort and security years after the event, to point an accusing finger at European Jewry and castigate them for shortcomings of one kind or another, ostensibly deserving of such horrendous suffering, is an unparalleled instance of criminal arrogance and brutal insensitivity. How dare anyone even suggest that any sin committed by any significant faction of European Jewry was worthy of all the pain and anguish and death brought upon them by Hitler's sadistic butchers? How dare anyone sitting in the American or British or Israeli paradise indict the martyrs who were consumed in the European hell? Let's look back at source number 3. What we started with, source number 4, what we started with. The letter that made me nuts. Rabbi Aaron Feldman wrote this letter after October 7th. And in it he says, it's inexplicable that October 7th could take place. He says, and there's no rational explanation for it, he said. There's nothing. We can't explain how they got in. We had all, the walls were completely secure and technology. And then he raises the voice. He goes into the first person in the letter as if he says, I'm not a prophet, but I can imagine what the prophets would say to us.
Humble.
Very humble. The Jewish nation was my hope for mankind. I created the world so that mankind will overcome evil and accept me as their sovereign. The instrument for reaching this goal would be my nation. When the proper time arrives, I will appear to them in all my glory, and all of mankind will then recognize that man was created to devote himself to my service. Because the Jewish nation is crucial to carrying out my plans for the world, I watched over them and protected them throughout the ages from the nations of the world who sought to devour them. When I read that line, I thought to myself, really? But you decided to thwart my plans. You, meaning Israel, Israelis. You decided to use my land to remake Jews into a nation like the nations of the world. You wanted Jews to be like them and live for the fulfillment of their appetites, materialism, too materialistic, and to make wealth and military conquest the apex of their glory. You wanted Jews to forget that they were meant to be a holy nation. I have tried repeatedly to warn you of the evil of your ways. I sent you the Yom Kippur War, the missiles of Saddam Hussein, the Intifada, the Gaza missile attacks, and sundry other messages to show you cannot build a Jewish nation and leave me out. But none of these warnings were to any avail. I became mostly concerned lately when you demonstrated for 3 months against me, when generals announced their resignation, when professors signed petitions, when your wealthy donated millions for advertisements and demonstrators to block the streets. I know the demonstrations were ostensibly against judicial reform, to retain the right of the Supreme Court to override the Knesset, but I also know that for most of you, the demonstrations were aimed at my Torah, to ensure that the Supreme Court would block any intrusion of religion into your society. Vayidom Aaron, and Aaron was silent. Unfortunately, this Aaron was not. Gesundheit. Unfortunately, and he's a great man in Torah, and I personally can imagine great human beings who make, I think, grave mistakes. I think this is a grave mistake, and it's offensive. It's offensive to imagine that the babies that were murdered, or any of those who were killed on that day, were in any way, shape, or form an instrument of God to wake us up in that way. I find that extremely offensive. So I prefer to think of not an explanation of evil, but rather the response to it. The response to evil, the response to the absolutely unimaginable, the response and the heroism and the gevurah, the radical profound giborim, great heroes and heroines, people who rose above thinking about the why and instead determined to take themselves to remain human in spite of inhumanity and the absolutely unimaginable. And that was where we went last night in Aaron's silence, that he was acting as a resistance fighter. That silence, and then even more than silence, his response to Moshe in verse 18, right? Hayitav, he found a voice in the face of unspeakable tragedy to maintain his own humanity. He didn't implicate God, he didn't blame God, he didn't blame his brother. He said, we will remain human. My sons could not eat that day because would God have been okay with that? And so I wanted to just last two sources with all of you, and then we'll open it up last 15 minutes to show you the story that I quoted last night about the flying letters. I think it deserves to be seen inside to see this story. It's from source number 11. You see it? Follow along in the English. I'm going to read the Aramaic and then we're done. Is it 9:40 now? Great. Tana Rabbanan, the rabbis taught. Kishachala Rabbi Yossi ben Kisma, when Rabbi Yossi ben Kisma became sick, or ill, halach Rabbi Chanina ben Tiradyon the Bakro. Rabbi Chanina, the son of Tiradyon, also an interesting name, but we're not going to go into that now, to visit him. This Rabbi Chanina, by the way, was the father of none other than Bruria. Who is Bruria? The great, remarkable woman who's, in her own right, was a Rebbe. She was married to Rabbi Meir. Rabbi Meir was her husband. She was Rabbi Meir's wife. She was a great teacher of Torah, an amazing human being. Amar lo, Chanina Achi, says to him, Chanina, my brother, do you not know that this occupying force, the Romans, have been placed in power through heaven? Heaven placed them here. They destroyed God's house, and they burned his hechal, his chamber, his palace, and murdered God's devotees. Look, still around. Must be that God wants them to be here for some instrument of God. He says, but I'm hearing about you that you're resisting them. You're breaking the law. You're sitting with the Torah, gathering people together, right? What are you doing? They told you you're not allowed to learn Torah. The Romans decided you can't learn Torah. What are you being such a resistance? So Chanina said, Min Hashamayim yirachamu, that God will have compassion on me. Amar lo, ani omer lecha dvarim shel tam, v'ata omer li min Hashamayim yirachamu. This is an amazing conversation. I'm giving you like rational, like I'm concerned, like you're going against, he says, and you're saying you're going against God's will. You're saying God will provide. Like you're saying it's from heaven they're going to have mercy on me, right? That's crazy, he says. He says, he says, in the end, you're going to go up in flames. Like you're acting in an irrational way. Like it's going to end poorly for you. What are you doing? Amar la Rebbe. He doesn't even answer. He says, Rabbi, do you have any insight into what my heaven might look like? In other words, I don't mind dying. Just tell me what heaven's going to look like for me. Did I do what I needed to do? Because I can go, right? As long as my heaven's assured that I don't mind going up in flames. So he says to him, he said, did you do anything unique that I might know, the way of your, like, what your reward's going to be? Give me an example. He says, once, he says, once my money, I had poor money that was given, and it got mixed up with money that was for tzedakah, for to give to the, right? And I gave it all away to the aniyim. I gave away literally millions of dollars, right? To the poor and the destitute. Amarlo in Cain, he says, if that's really what happened, he said, if that's the case, then I want what you have in the world to come, right? Sounds like you did good, right? So your world to come is assured. Amru lo ayu yamim muatim. It wasn't long until Rabbi Yossi ben Kisma, this original rabbi, he died, a friend of Rabbi Chanina. And V'alchul kol gedolei Romi lekavro v'spidu hesped gadol. And all of the great Roman, right, politicians came to bury him and to give him a hesped, to eulogize him. Atan, this is so great the way they set this up. In other words, this Rabbi Yossi ben Kisma played the game the right way. He played the game. Like all the politicians of Rome respected him. He was a very, dutiful, occupied. And they all went to his funeral, but on the way back from the funeral, guess whom they saw? They saw Rabbi Chanina ben Tradion sitting and learning Torah, teaching Torah. And he had big kilot, big people gathered around him, and he had a Sefer Torah, Munach lo b'cheko. And he had this Sefer Torah that was in his bosom, like he was sitting with the Sefer Torah. So what did they do? Krachu b'Sefer Torah. They took him, and they took the same Sefer Torah and they wrapped it around him. They put all these twigs around him and kindling, and they lit it on fire. They put wool sponges and dripped them in water, and they put them on his heart so that he would suffer longer. Amr Lobito, Abba, his daughter said to him, Abba, Tata, father, how can I see you this way? Amar Le, he said to her, if I was being burned alone, it would be difficult for me. Says, now that I'm being engulfed in flames and the Torah is with me, the one who can come and defend the honor of Torah will also, right, take up my case. Amr Lo Talmidav, and then the students asked him, Matar, what do you see? Amarlan Gilyon Nisraf. Nisrafin, Givilin, or Gilyon, I see this parchment is burning. Of course, he's talking about his own body also. The Osios Porchot, and the letters are flying away. They're flying, Porchot. They're blooming and flying. He says, and this also becomes a text later on for euthanasia. They asked him to open up his mouth that the fire might go inside, and he refused. He said, I won't, I'll let God take me, I won't make my death go quicker. And then he spoke to the executioner, and he said to the executioner, the executioner said to him, Rabbi, the executioner said, he saw how holy this person was, he said, if I increase the fire so that you suffer less, will you give me some of your reward in the world to come? And he said, yes, I will. And so he said, swear to me, and he swore to him, and he increased the flames, he took off the tzemer, the wool, and he died, and Chanina ben Teradia died, and then the executioner jumped also into the flame. A voice from heaven came out and said, Rabbi Chanina ben Teradion said, both you, Rabbi Chanina, and the executioner, you have a portion in the world to come. And when a certain Rebbe heard this, he cried and said, there's someone who can acquire their world in one moment, and one whom it takes many years. This story is a story of spiritual resistance. And as I said last night, that was what the Aaron and all these other individuals who refuse to be dehumanized. Look at the last source, and then I'll open it up. I just want to tell the story of Reb Mendel that I mentioned last night. The Reb Mendel Alter. Reb Mendel was the brother of the great Ger Rebbe. And with this, we're going to, open it. The meaning of this formulation was not intended as a call to arms, which in their situation was beyond them. It was similar to Yankel Gepin's "We Shall Not Budge," part of the battle in the realm of the spirit, the retention of the authenticity of one's own being, defying the force of the dehumanizing conditions, and in the style of Mata Gelman, to break and not to be broken. In the terminology of these Jews, the battle was with Satan. It is doubtful that anyone was able to offer a clearer understanding of the significance of the confrontation than Rabbi Mendel Alter of Pabianice, brother of the Ger Rebbe. The account of his walk to the gas chambers in Treblinka at the head of a large group of Jews has become legend, As he was taken to the gas chambers, he pleaded with one of the capos for some water. To everyone's surprise, the man who was one of the most sadistic, I said this last night, among the German lackeys, he brought in the water, but Reb Mendele didn't drink it. But he used it to wash his hands and prepare himself for the last prayer on earth, saying the vidur, the customary confession of sins. And then he told them of a personal experience. When the Nazis first came to his home to beat him and to torture him, it hurt very much, and he was in great pain. But suddenly his eyes were opened with understanding. The Germans discovered a scroll of the Torah in his room. At once they let him go and threw themselves with cruel anger and mad, murderous desire upon the Sefer Torah. They trod on it with their feet and tore the parchment with fanatical hatred, as if sensing that the letters on them contained the lifeblood of the Jewish people. Witnesses tell of similar events in other places. On at least one occasion known to us, a German officer, upon discovering a Torah scroll in a secret little shtiv, a little shul, pulled out his bayonet and stabbed the scroll several times in his fury as if it were a human being. Reb Mendele concluded his remarks by saying, when I saw this, I regained my composure. I understood the meaning of the words in the Psalms, you make me wise through my enemies. It is not my body that the enemy means to crush. When the enemy fights against the source of holiness, he slaughters the children of Israel. When he wants to destroy the strength of the Jews, he treads underfoot the parchment of the Torah, the Constitution. It is doubtful if anyone had a deeper understanding of the nature of Nazi Germany than these Jews. The struggle for them was not a political one. It even transcended the realm of morality and ethics. It had to be fought against the consciously planned defilement of the very sources of human beings' humanity. Nazi Germany was the deification of the diabolical, the religious befouling of all purity and innocence. And so, right, even if his body was destroyed in his own life, the rebellion against the forces of defilement were defeated. This truth found its dramatic affirmation in the final hour of the Chenzener Rebbe. When a German soldier was trying to cut his beard, he shouted at him, "Don't touch me with your defiled hands." And he was shot. The incident recalls a passage from Paul Ricoeur as a symbolism of evil, which defines the dread of the impure. It is a reaction to a threat which, beyond the threat of suffering and death, aims at a diminution of existence, a loss of the personal core of one's being. This, as I said Wednesday night, and I said in my sermon last night, this, I think, is at the core of Aaron's silence and what he says to Moshe. And this, in my personal opinion, is the proper holy response to what theodicy poorly does. We don't understand why things like this exist in the world. We really don't. We don't exist. We don't. And our response must be an absolute radical refusal to allow for the diminishment and the diminution of our own essential core being, who we are, individually, collectively, as a country, as the Jewish people, as Americans, as citizens of the world. Greater is the diminishment of that core of who we are. The greatest danger, right? The greatest danger to Aaron was not in that moment, right? Like that he was worried about himself. He was worried about what in the face of suffering would dehumanize him and his own family. And that what Moshe was asking him was threatening to his own personhood, like who I am and who my children are. And the Torah records this for us forever, for posterity, so that when the time would come and people would say, this is why this is why Rabbi Akiva is dying, is because X, Y, and Z. And then Moshe would say to God, what is that? And God would say, be silent. Right? Don't dehumanize their suffering. It's God's rebuke of the friends of Job who tried, or of rabbis who tried to explain October 7, or others who tried. It's like to maintain our humanity at all costs. Okay, lots to open up here. Okay, friends who've been waiting so patiently, thank you, Asher Chaim, and then Beth, and then in the room.
If I may just take a moment to absorb this amazing Torah and let someone else speak first. I do have some comments, but I'd like to wait.
Okay, sure. Beth, go ahead.
Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom.
I was struck by the explicit statement in Torah about Aharon being silent. And it got me thinking about other silences in Torah. I mean, obviously, we don't just, when we read it out loud, we don't just read it all in a big rush with no pauses. We, of course, have pauses. Whoever's doing the laning has to stop and take a breath. And I was thinking about the comparison of a Torah scroll with written words and a musical score with the notes. And there actually is a musical notation for silence, and that's a pause or a rest symbol. And it just got me thinking about what does it mean to rest? In music, often these pauses are what we would call a pregnant pause. It gives a chance for the colors of the music to reverberate and come to an end while we sit and listen and let that happen. And I think perhaps when we have this explicit rest in the Torah, we're being told the same thing. Let the resonance come to an end. DeBerti.
Mati. You know, Rav Nachman, when he says the Torah about reframing God's, or the rabbinic story where God says, be quiet, that's what my mind said, or that's my decree. Rav Nachman says, as you enter the silence, that's only the first stage. Silence is where paradox can be resolved, but it's not resolved in the world of language. But then Rav Nachman moves out of silence into nigun, into melody, and says that melody also, right, from silence, melody emerges. And melody that is without words, but melody nonetheless, that has this form, right, where there is silence and there's yearning and there's up and there's down. And this pregnant pause is built in to singing. And it would have been great had the Torah actually been silent. Like there should have been like a big gap in the Torah at this moment. But I didn't write the Torah, so it's not up to me. But maybe when we read the Torah at this moment, and maybe, you know, in future, to really take a moment there when Aaron is silent, to allow there to be that rest, as you said, like a little, you know, a rest symbol, you know, quiet. We don't know. And take it in. And the mind also, it's also beautiful what you're saying, Beth, because without rest, the music doesn't really sit. It can't really do its work. And when there's that rest symbol, it almost becomes like telling the mind to stop wrestling with this so much. And that when the mind softens, maybe something will emerge. I remember reading, when I was a young man, Aryeh Kaplan, great Orthodox theologian and writer, who wrote many, many books on Jewish mysticism and theology and philosophy. He once was talking about, he was also a great scientist and mathematician. And he said once when he was trying to figure out a very intense mathematical formula that he could not figure it out, he decided to give his mind a rest and went and took a bath. And while he was in the bathtub and his mind was not trying to untangle the knot, the answer appeared. And there was a kind of shemitah of the mind. Like the mind had to be dormant for a bit, for something other than the mind to offer itself, right? It took that moment. So that's beautiful. Thanks, Beth. All right, you go into the room, Ray, and then friends, yeah.
So jumping right on that, Rabbi, you know, I'm still.
Get that, can people hear Ray? Yeah?
Sorry.
Yeah.
Yeah, can we like have people speak into the mic a bit more, please? Thank you.
Yeah. Okay, hopefully you can hear me now. You know, so here, my mother's a Holocaust survivor. Half my family were Holocaust survivors in Dachau. This has profoundly affected my family, my upbringing, my child, all the way down. And all I'm thinking, and you know, so I'm wondering, you know, maybe you could say more, you know, is Aaron saying when he says to Moses here, if my children had eaten the sin offering, if I had done it, would God have approved? In other words, is he saying, would it have made a difference? A, is he asking, would it have made a difference? And B, I just have to accept this mystery. that in a sense it's a mystery, right? And that, and like you were saying in the parable where God says,
Yeah,
listen, don't question and ask. This is my mind.
right.
So are we to just, this is part of the mystery of the universe I created for you.
Right.
Yeah.
So I
I'm
think-
almost like I'm speechless.
No,
I
of course.
don't know.
No, I think that the point of those who are,
Oh, sorry about that. Sorry.
I think the point of the silence is not actually to be dutiful. It's not this and it's not that. It's not acceptance as faith, and it's not rejection as heresy. It's the refusal to use this in any way to both defend God's existence and goodness or to deny it, either direction. Is to say, this is something that it defies, I can't explain it, and it's a mystery. And that probably goes for good things too, right? Like there's a way that this mystery it holds, and I think that there's another way that also this is in Faith After the Holocaust. Eliezer Berkowitz, who was the author of the last piece, he writes that, and that's also something many have said, like in the aftermath of the Holocaust, people who lost their faith, we have nothing to say to them, meaning there can be no judgment. There can be no judgment to someone who said, you know what, would God want me now to go back and keep Shabbat? Would God want me to go now and keep the communion or keep, like in the face of radical evil, we should be humble and say, right, there were people who said that during the Inquisition, there were many people who said that those who refused to give their lives at the stake had failed the great test of, right, because there are three grave sins that we're not supposed to give our lives, we're supposed to give our lives for. Only three, by the way, but three big ones, right? If somebody says to you, convert, or I'll kill you, you should be killed. If I'm not saying that everybody should be, but that's a tradition. And in the aftermath of the Inquisition, there was a lot of critique of Spanish Jewry and others. Maybe they had been exposed to philosophy, and that's why they weren't able to withstand so in the aftermath of what happens in the Torah, Aaron levies a question that carries all of us, which is, in the aftermath of that which is absolutely unfathomable, who are we to judge? Someone loses a child and decides to become, in Elie Wiesel's book Night, right? The question is, we can't point fingers, but we can ask questions and we can enter into sympathy or even making radical space for not knowing around these things. And it's always the scratching of an itch that will not go away no matter how much you scratch it will lead to bleeding.
Well, I want to tell you, Rabbi, if I can, just quickly, what I would tell my